Hey, what's going on? This is Miguel here. Today I'm going to be going over the exact framework I've been using to close over 90% on my offer. And just to show you some proof of that, I got a couple of messages from my team here. So easy, especially for you, 93% close rate. Easier close rate is insane, dog. Pretty sure it's in the 90s or something. Yeah, I like how you get on their side from the start. Very actually cool. This can't lie. Swagginess of the pitch, the process. Really honest with these. You can read it there. You can't drop that on the internet, you know what I mean? But before I even get into that, really, let me give you a little bit more background about me getting into this space, so that way you can kind of know who you're listening to. I've closed over $1 million in cash collected, did millions of dollars as an SDR in the corporate space, did a little bit of phone setting, and I'm currently based in Bangkok, Thailand, so doing the internet money thing, living overseas with this. So if it's something you're wanting to do the traveling, make money online, close deals, get into online business, this video is definitely for you. Okay, but let's get into the actual framework itself. All right, so this is the one I use. I have a couple of different objection handling guides I use in tandem with this, which I can make a separate video on as well. So before we even get to the framework, what is closing to begin with? Okay, if you don't know, you do Zoom or phone sales, you can make 8 to 15K a month. You're basically just going to be going through the full process I'll go over, where you handle objections, you guide clients, customers to a buying decision. And it can be a long-term career. There are people making 6 figures a month with this. Obviously, you can get to 6 figures a year if you really want to grind it out. It is something you can do, but this is more so a foundational skill to make you a shit ton of money to progress into something later on. All right, but getting to the framework itself, we have tangible outcome, the current situation, problem awareness, pre-handling, ideal criteria, future pacing, cost of an action, and then pitch. So there are about 8 stages to the sales call. You can add objection handling here at the bottom as well, but hopefully we don't get too many objections, and I don't really get too many objections with this, which I can share with you in another video on how to actually prevent those. So when it comes to tangible outcome, okay, this is basically you're just getting out of them what they want. All right. Let's say they're getting on a call, you're selling a service, which is very common in here, would be like a trading course, right? Or you're selling, even a sales program like mine, right? I actually have a sales program where I help people implement this and land roles. Say you're selling mine, for example. A lot of those people who I work with are people who are in 9 to 5s who want to get out of their job, or they're like in a corporate sales career. And if they're in corporate sales, I from that background as well. I know the pain points of that. I know it sucks. You put in a lot of work, but you don't make as much money as you can be making, right? So, a lot of the times those folks or people in 9 to 5 in general, they just want to make more money, have more freedom in their life, right? So that's the tangible outcome. Unacceptable answers and tangible outcome, if you're asking them what they're looking to get, would be like, oh, get more information, right? And what does that more information entail? It's not very contextual to them. So if you're in the tangible outcome stage and people are telling you, hey, look, I'm just looking for more info, it's like, well, what more info to do what exactly, right? So you want to make it very contextual to them. You want it to be tangible. Make more money and be able to travel is a pretty good one, right? You don't necessarily need to get a dollar amount. Now you can get a dollar amount and financially qualify in the tangible stage. It is something you can do, and I would recommend if you don't have a lot of information, whether it's from your setter or marketing in general. But it's not something that's completely necessary. Okay. Then you go in the current situation, which is what they're currently doing now in order to cause their experience, right? So, let's say they are a 9 to 5 or corporate salesperson, right? They're making 5K a month, but they want to make 10K a month, be able to travel. Well, first off, they're in the office, right? They're only making 5K a month. They're capped on their income. They have a lot of internal meetings. So, that's going to end up causing the problem. But the current situation is the fact that they are in a corporate sales job, working in the office, being in person. Okay, so how long have they been doing it, right? How they even get into that in the first place. Certain things like that. Those are good questions you could ask. And then that would lead into the problem awareness, which is where we understand the reason we are facing our problems now is a byproduct of our current situation, right? Because if you articulate to someone, hey, look, you want this outcome, and the reason you're not able to get that and you're facing these problems instead, it's because of your methodology and your way of doing things. And when you let someone know that, naturally they're going to be shifting away from it. Okay, so if I can get them to associate their problems with what they're doing now, and this is all associated, now they're more likely to be open to a new solution in order to get to their tangible outcome because they now know it isn't possible to get there with their current way of doing things, right? You're not going to make 30, 50K a month, be able to travel to Asia, for example, right? Like I'm doing now, whenever you're doing bullshit in a corporate office, right? So it's just not going to happen. So that's what we need them to understand, and then they're open to our solution, which is obviously the program that we provide, and the coaching, mentorship, whatever it is, right? This can apply to the B2B sense as well. This framework works for really anything. You could sell anything using this. But in general, we're more so talking about B2C biz op. That's what this framework is generally for. Okay, then we go from there into the pre-handling stage. What this is going to do is basically understand why they haven't bought or made a change in the past. Okay, because if they haven't made a decision based upon XYZ factor, if we don't handle that and get it handled right now, that is going to come up at the end of the call where there's going to be more tension because there's a price drop and a price shock, and then they're less likely to move forward and be open to changing their mind, right? So if we can make this a natural conversational flow and it's less confrontational, right, and it doesn't feel like we're trying to push them over the edge here, and we can get them to reframe their mindset, when we go into the rest of our call and we give them the pitch at the end, we give them the price, where we can just completely prevent objections and get them to kind of lay down and buy. Okay, so you can definitely take your time here. This is going to be probably one of the more skillful aspects of sales, in my opinion, right? Discovery in general is the most important way to start. And pre-handling, I think, is the most advanced part within discovery. So if once you get really good with this and you can nail it down, you can dramatically improve your close rates. That's something that's really been able to help me, close at above that 90% range, right? Now, is this 90% going to be sustained? I don't know. But easily 60, 70% you could close once you become very elite and you've been doing it for a few years, and you nail all of these different steps. All right, obviously it's offer dependent as well. I have a very good offer, very good process, and I have a really good team, so that's also why I've been able to do this. Let's not ignore them as well. But going from there into ideal criteria, so we're going to find 2 to 3 buying values, right? For example, if we're selling a fitness coaching offer, and we're helping them lose weight, and they say they don't like red meat, we're not at the end of the call going to say we give them a primarily red meat diet because they're not going to buy, right? We're going to lean into whatever they want. Also, in another sense, let's say somebody really wants one-on-one coaching and they don't care about course curriculum. We are barely going to even mention the course curriculum, and we're going to put emphasis on the one-on-one coaching and the reasons they want that one-to-one coaching whenever we create our 3-pillared pitch, which I'll get to here in a moment. But from there, we go into future pacing. Right? What is the income they would like to have in the future? What does that tangibly do for them? Right? Let's say they want to make 10, 15K a month, but how does in travel, how does that tangibly impact their life? One, they're actually able to travel, right? Because they have the funds and capacity to do so. Then they're also able to, pay off debts, which relieves stress, which then would be the emotional goal, right? Once they're able to pay off debts, provide to their family, it makes them feel fulfilled to provide for their family while simultaneously getting rid of those debts. Okay, then we go into cost of inaction. What happens if they don't make this change? Okay, because now we've built them all the way up here, had their goals, we've quantified what they want to do, and then we give them, what happens if nothing changes? Well, nothing's going to change. What does that happen on how long of time horizon? How does that make you feel, right? And then we get those same exact impacts, basically the tangible goal, income goal, emotional goal, but on the contrary of like what happens if we know we don't do that. And that's what really helps them create that gap, which ultimately leads them to more likely to make a buying decision. Then that's when we get into the pitch, where we use their own words against them, right? All of this throughout the call is ammunition to then give a really dialed in pitch to where they inevitably purchase. Okay, then from there we can get to the objection handling. So that is the framework. Now I'll kind of come over here and show you it, give you a little bit more, couple more nuances. Right. So as far as tonality goes, I think that's going to be huge, is the pacing and tonality that you use throughout this. It's really going to be offer and prospects dependent. Once you really know your ICP and their pain points and what they, who they are, that's going to dictate how this goes. Now, for me, I'm working primarily with a more sophisticated audience. For most of this, it's sophisticated B2B because my creator, he attracts an audience of primarily 40, 50-year-olds. And even 60-year-olds, and a lot of them are entrepreneurs in their own right, are successful, lawyers and stuff like that. So being able to, talk to them in a certain way is going to benefit me versus if I talk to them in the same way as I would talk to a young audience of 20 to 25-year-old males, right, who want to make their first 5 to 10K a month online. So that being said, as far as tonality and how I like to go through this, I like to come in a little high, right? I don't like to spend a lot of time on rapport. Okay, because if you're spending a lot of time on rapport, it's just like, why are you don't really need to know me, man. Like, that's what they're thinking. Okay, but in the same light, you want to build some sort of personal connection with them. I also don't like to go too hard on rapport because it also throws off the flow of the call, and I kind of like to keep that in track. Also, when you're following a framework like this, you don't necessarily need to be autistic and like read it word for word. You don't need to be a complete script kitten, but I would generally try to hit most of these points. And then you'd also want to address objections as they come up. So I've had times where I've pre-handled objections immediately off of their rip once I identify them, because it makes it a lot less natural if you hear the objection, you put a note in the back of your mind, and then you come back to it at the pre-handling stage in the call, where you don't know how to bring it back up, right? It makes a lot more sense to address it right then and there, and it makes the conversation more naturally flow. And then if you can handle it right there, then the rest of the call, that's not going to be a belief that's limiting them in the back of their mind. Okay, so coming into this introductory phase one more time, getting this tangible goal, right? You have some examples of if they gave you bullshit answers. This is kind of the conversational flow. You don't need to actually ask these word verbatim, but I generally follow this flow. I get what they're doing, how long they've been doing that for. Are they looking to make this full time? And if they say they don't want to make it full time on the cash, I get what would it, if there was a dollar amount to make you do this full time, like, or a scenario where this would apply to make you want to do this full time, like, what does that look like? And then they'll be like, well, if it can do this and that, like, and then I would handle, if, like, why do they think it's an if, do they even think this is possible for them, right? It's something I'll usually handle, and they'll say they can see a world where it is possible. It'll be like, okay, cool, right? And, sometimes I'll throw in some analogies or reframes to kind of address this full-time thing off the rip. Ask them, do they like their role? Reason you ask them that versus, like, if they don't like it, right? It's because then they're going to try to prove to you that they do like it a lot of the time, which is funny as fuck. But yeah, if I ask them if do they like it, a lot of times they'll give me no. But I kind of want them to lean into the positives, and then ask them why not double down right here. Okay, once they give me the positives, I say what we make this pivot into what they don't like. How that looks, for example, is like, let's say they are a sales guy, right? I'm like, what do you like about it? It's like, oh, it's been consistent income for me for the past 2 years. But I'll ask them, rather than like I'll say, things will sound so terrible. What's the main reasoning behind you wanting to pivot in the freelance then, rather than just doubling down and becoming an account executive, director, and whatnot? Then they'll lean into some sort of corporate politics bullshit, or something as far as capped income, not having the freedom. I'll probe that. A lot of times, somebody says, capped my freedom. Instead of asking, what do you mean, how do you mean, you can say, capped your freedom, like, what do you mean by that? Right? Or if they say, capped my freedom, be like, capped your freedom. Say it in a curious tone, capped your freedom, right? And then they'll be like, yeah, capped my freedom as in this and this and that. Yeah, I'm like, and what's that doing, man? Like to you? Oh, well, blah, 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 blah. And then how long has that been going on for? Right, and then you continue to go down here. Okay, hope this is making sense. Not too much of a ramble here. But then once we expand on the problem, we do a do-it-yourself pre-handle here, right? Because you don't want to get somebody at the end of the call saying, look, I just want to go do this myself. Trust me, you'll get it. Versus that happening, you can just address it right here. Ask them why they want to get help versus doing it on their own. It's usually going to relate the speed. Okay, then that's when we go into the pre-handling stage of the call. Once again, we spoke about earlier, where you uncover their buying triggers, right? I mean, not buying triggers, but what's kept them from not buying in the past. Okay, then before you start speaking with me, have you tried any online business models, coaching programs, stuff like that? And if so, what have you tried? You could either go down the I've tried or I haven't. Usually it's not going to be it's going to be an I haven't. But with the I tried before, if they've gotten burnt, you go into the girlfriend reframe. And then which basically looks like, have you had a relationship in the past that didn't work? Right. Did you stop dating completely? Why not? That whole spiel. Okay. Or you could always, if they give you some bullshit excuses, other people are getting results in the program, you could always just pivot back into the normal, how are things different, looking to try again, give them perspective, right? This way of thinking, all that jazz. I have a couple go-to reframes right here I use. All right, and then once we pre-handle all the objections, sometimes this can take 30 minutes to go through. You'll then go into the ideal criteria stage. Okay, this is where we get those buying triggers and buying values to where we can tailor our pitch at the end. Okay, then after that, we go into the next stage, which would be future pacing. Okay, we want them to have a big goal to create enough of a gap, because if they say I just want to make 2K a month on the side extra, that's not big enough. We want to have them stretch out the goal. A big secret to do that is to reference good case studies from your program. Like I have guys in my coaching program, not my coaching program, but the one I'm selling for right now, who are making over 50K a month of the business. So I can reference what they were able to do. People were hitting 5K a month in the first month, 15K a month within 2-3 months, right? And if I reference that and show them what's possible, then they'll be like, yeah, well, actually, I want to do what he's doing, right? And then that's when you future pace, how would that making that money impact them tangibly and all that, and then the emotional consequences of that. Then we go into consequencing if you don't do that, right? And that is the cost of inaction, okay? Then we go into the 3-pillared pitch here at the end. I also structure this different based upon who I'm talking to, because sometimes I'll ask how much money you have set aside for something like this, right? Because that'll help me better off gauge what program I want to pitch to them. If I haven't engaged how much their income is earlier on in the call, right? But I also sell there's a lot of price points on my offer, so I don't just necessarily say, oh, so it's going to be this and that for X amount of time, right? So for my coaching program, for example, it's a flat price basically. I only have 2 coaching programs, and one's a downsell and one is what I sell right now. I have a one-on-one program, and then I have a group coaching program. So I'm going to downsell into the group, but I'm primarily pitching the one-on-one, right? Unless I just know they're not financially qualified for the one-on-one. Then that's how I do it. But if you have multiple price points, like I do 4 price points, I kind of like to gauge where they're at, how much they're looking to invest into this. And then I'll kind of go through the pitch, give them out the different programs. And then, usually you'll get some sort of objection. Maybe it's a logistical question. You help them with that. It's usually a logistical money thing, and then you handle that. Okay? So, I know I yapped to you all for a good bit of time, but this is essentially the process and framework I've been using to close over 90%. My offers packages range anywhere from 3K to 10K, right? So it's a fun process to do. It works. This is something that you can replicate on any offer and use, and it's what I've been able to close consistently over 50% on the offers I've been on. It's what I've used to close for people like Investor Mike right here, who's got his offer up to $1 million a month. Worked with Chase Hughes, CEO of Pro AI, exited his company. Learned from Luke Alexander, sold for Jace England, and currently working with Leon and Noah here, who do an amazing job as well. So if this is something you are interested in applying yourself and using, don't hesitate to drop questions down below in the Instagram, into my Instagram in the description, or you can drop them in the comments down below, and I'll give you some assistance there. Better yet, if you're ready to actually apply this yourself and start raking in some money, man, and you want to work with me, I got a link down in the description below to work with me as well. So hope this was helpful, and appreciate you for watching.